Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our third and final Contributor Summit online educational jam session. My name is Anna Velasco, and I'm the community manager of Puppet. I help run community and contributor events like this webinar, and I also lead our evangelism program as well as our Puppet user groups. And I'd like to introduce to you our presenter, Mari Federo. Mari is a UX designer at Puppet, and she'll be giving us a crash course on UX and usability.
All right. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to make sure you could see my face, but I'm not sure you can. So if you can, hello. If you can't, I'm apparently pressing the wrong buttons. I do have some slides because I think especially when you're kind of new to concepts, as I imagine many of you will think you are, that it's kind of useful to have an anchoring point. It looks like there aren't very many of us, though, so despite the slides, I want this to be really informal. Please interrupt as often as you need to feel like you understand what I'm getting at or what I'm saying or how to apply it. This will be the first time I've done a presentation like this one, so I ask you all to bear with me, and I'm very open to whatever feedback you might have because it's really a thing I'd like to do more of, both externally for contributors like you folks and even internally just for everyone at the company, since there is no downsides to being more UX minded no matter what you're doing in your life. That's me. That's my email, justmari@puppet.com. I welcome your thoughts, questions, etc. And yeah, that's pretty much that side. So I thought we'd start with kind of a UX exercise that encompasses something a lot of us experience, which is the humble carrot peeler. So in this exercise, we're gonna say, oh, I need to peel some carrots. And our goal in this is to find the best carrot peeler. So take a minute and just sort of think, what do you think are the characteristics of a good carrot peeler? And then let's talk about some situations and what the best carrot peeler might be. If you're a college student going camping, you want the cheapest, lightest carrot peeler you can possibly find. You can get this carrot peeler basically anywhere, and I'm sure, unless you are an anti-carrot type of person, that at some point in your life you've held this carrot peeler. It's not the most comfortable, and it's certainly not fancy, but you're out camping, you grab it, you peel a carrot, you're good to go, right? But now, let's say you're making a fancy carrot dish for 12 of your closest family members. Suddenly, the idea of using that tiny, weeny metal carrot peeler is a terrible idea. And instead, you probably want this, well, I'm not being endorsed, but just for the record, it's an OXO Good Grips carrot peeler. And there you get this nice rubber grip, and suddenly you're like, oh, I could peel carrots for days. So basically, and then on the end, you'll see, okay, well, what if you had to peel carrots and you're making some kind of gratin and you also need to clean and peel potatoes? Well, now you don't just want this thing that, this unitasking carrot peeler. What good is that? You want this sweet carrot peeler brush eye remover that can do a couple more things so you can use one tool to get everything done. At the end of the day, as you can see, all three of these carrot peelers may be the best carrot peeler, depending on how many carrots you want to peel, where you want to peel them, and whether it's just carrots you want to peel or you might be working on some potatoes as well. And that sort of brings us to what I think is the primary concept of UX as a whole. So UX is just user experience, but what we're going to focus on, as sort of implied, is good user experience. So everything you do every day when you're interacting with a thing, whether it's opening a door, playing a game on your cell phone, typing on a keyboard, all of those things are user experiences. And basically the way to approach improving them is to understand that your users understand the tasks they're performing. So what are they trying to do, and understand their context. So are they trying to peel 2 carrots at a campfire, or are they trying to peel 300 carrots in a gourmet kitchen? And the core goal of improving UX, so kind of the definition of I improved this experience for a user, is making it faster and easier for whoever is using it to do whatever they need to do in the context they need to do it in. So for instance, if you're like, oh, you're going camping, here, take this bulky peeler brush. Yes, they can peel carrots so they can perform the task, but in the context of what they need, you've just, put this large, bulky, strange thing into their bag. you're giving them more than they need. And especially if, say, they're going to do through camping and they're, 10 days of camping out from civilization, they probably don't want the stupid brush. And if you think about that for a second, just like experiences in your life, I think you can think of a lot of situations where there's a tool you need and now someone's added a stupid brush. Then what is the research side of that? So research defines the problem. So research allows you to answer questions like, who's going to use this? What do they need? And what are the contexts they're using it in? This is a very kind of broad picture of research, and I think that overview is helpful. So I'm going to get a little bit into how research is at Puppet, just to give you some examples, and then after that, I'll get kind of really down and tactical, like maybe you've never done research before, but let's sort of go over some quick, easy, here's what you could do. It's not so bad, and I think the thing to remember is, like, the sooner you start, it's just like, it's like any muscle you want to build. The sooner you start doing it, the faster it becomes easier and more intuitive. And I think you can be genuinely amazed how easy it is to get back something useful from even like a 5-minute research experience. So, research at Puppet. We conduct qualitative and quantitative research. So we conduct research that's heavily numbers-based, and we conduct research that's much more like wordsy. And we do it to understand kind of the problem landscapes, the people using our products, and the different spaces they use our products in. So research informs design. In our case, it informs product decisions, both before we make them and kind of while we're making them, and then after we make them to sort of say, oh, did we make the right decision? We try to have actionable research outcomes. So it's easiest to get data and it's harder to get good data you can then use to make decisions. I mean, because you can walk up to anyone and be like, hey, is the sky blue? And they could say, it's kind of gray blue. And the next person could say, it's blue. And the third person could be like in a fully different country. Like, I can tell you outside it is foggy and the sky is pure gray. Hopefully it's not that way for all of you. And you could say, oh, it's a sunny, bright blue sky. Now you have data, you have 3 different data points about the sky, but good luck using them. And that's how easy it is to get data. And if you've ever taken a survey and been like, and half the questions you're like, I don't even know what this means, I'm just going to put number 4, then you have experienced the downsides of being the recipient of a data collection tool that isn't very well designed. Unfortunately, an excessively common problem in the modern world where people mistake the fact that you can get data for the fact that you should get data. So here's an example of a Puppet test pilot survey we did. Puppet test pilots, and some of you I don't recognize the names, but there are a lot of us. Puppet test pilots are people who are using Puppet products who basically opted into a research mailing list. And so these are the people we reach out to when we want to answer questions like, how many nodes do you manage? Or, what do you think of this prototype we built? And we find if you got really, really into research and you start doing it kind of all the time, then you will probably over time find it easier to kind of maintain basically a database of people who you can talk to versus cold calling or cold emailing, a random group of people. In your cases, this is probably more than you need, so I wouldn't start thinking about it unless, maybe the company you work for wants to get really serious about research, and there's some good room to have that be led by engineers. So basically, surveys are useful if you want to get to know a lot about a large group of users. You ask them, everyone's taken a survey, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time there. Another thing we do is, so this is very qualitative. This is a face-to-face research project. And these tend to be, and this will be more like what I'm going to advocate you folks do, just because you got to start somewhere. Though probably not face-to-face so much as remote. And most of what we do, because Puppet is international, we have Puppet users all over the world, we do almost entirely remote research as well. Unless there's an event or something. Like if you've ever been to PuppetConf, Puppet test pilots used to have a pretty impressive, if I say so myself, research and swag presence at PuppetConf. So that's another thing we do. The thing to do here is to remember that what you're going to get is a bit more anecdotal. So you can get a lot out of it, but it's good to remember you're only getting like a small slice of a pretty big pie. This is another thing that's probably a few steps up from most of what you'll need, but just to sort of give you a sense of the broader context. So this is from a site visit we did, and this is like pure context. So this is where someone works. This is what's on their whiteboard. This is the books in their bookcase. This is deep, useful kind of what's it like on the ground floor where someone works. And in many ways, this is the dream. Like if we could just, as a researcher, if I could just like sit on your shoulder all day long and watch you work, that would be glorious. It's not realistic, but it would be glorious. Also, I'm pretty tall, so I would be a pretty uncomfortable shoulder parrot. And I'm pretty talkative and loud too. So just to wrap that up, research helps us clarify new product landscapes, establish opportunities to innovate. So like you guys, when you came up with your Contributor Summit projects, you usually, and I'm going to guess, by and large, were solving a problem that you had personally. In our case, we don't tend to have those problems personally, though some of us do, as internally we use Puppet too. So we go out and we kind of say, well, what problems are you having? And that sort of establishes, oh, here's a thing we could do, here's a thing we could change, here's a thing we could improve, here's a thing we could add. And then again, in our case, it helps establish the business case. So here's the thing we want to build. Now let's go out and get research that says, yes, building this will have a positive effect on our users. It will help us get more product into the world that does good. All very important things. Testing, which is more what we're going to focus on today, is very usability focused. And I think this is often people's first thought about UX research, is this usability stuff, and where we will spend our time, and what I would recommend for you guys. I think it's a really good way to get into it, because it's pretty easy to sort of see, oh, this isn't working. Oh, this isn't helping people do what I think it does. Oh, this is confusing. Those are all kind of fairly easy to ascertain things, especially when you're sort of solving what I'm going to call kind of the first level problems. So the most obvious problems are going to come up first. And just solving those, A, sort of clears the way if you want to do further research to get deeper into the harder sort of underlying problems. And then B, like if you can't do further research, you've still like identified the thing that 9 out of 10 people are going to get driven crazy by, and now they're not going to be driven crazy by it. So props to you. So testing is, you can assess usability, you can identify like a high impact change, or you could ascertain whether a command name makes sense to new users. So as some of you build and code, you're probably going to make a lot of decisions. And every one of those decisions that impacts the user experience technically puts you in the shoes of a UX designer. I think that can be an unintuitive way of thinking about yourself. You're coding, but code is a user interface, which I will now emphasize for you with this lovely slide. So we consider Puppet to have 4 user interfaces. There's the obvious one. So if you have Puppet Enterprise, there's the PE console. And that's a graphical UI or a GUI, which is probably the term you've heard a lot of. We also have the command line interface, the CLI, the application programming interface, or API, and then the Puppet language itself. And all 4 of these things are different user interfaces and different user experiences. And while, we have certain rules around command structures and things to try to make things reasonably consistent, every time we introduce a new command, we have to sort of ask, does it work in these structures? Is it memorable? Is it staying? Does it follow instinctually the way people want it to be? All those sorts of things. So I think when people think of UX in general, often the first thing people think of, and this is very true, especially when UX is new, is like, oh, it's pretty. And that's the UI. But you can see here, all of these things are UX, which is why I say all of you are UX designers, because you're building a thing. Specifically with CLIs, which I think are going to be most relevant, it's about language consistency, language clarity, kind of what comes back, the output, the input, the text colors, the text shape. Is it a block of text? Is it formatted text? And all of these are things you can kind of test with your users to say, oh, does this make sense? So here's an example. Basically, testing tells us, is the way we're solving this problem an effective way to solve this problem? And here's an example of a remote test with a prototype looking at usability. So you can see how easy it is to kind of just share your screen. Here's what I'm doing. What do you think of it? And that's nice. So this is what we call a moderated test. Not really it's a pretty common term. But basically in this scenario, you kind of have someone, you guide them through a series of steps. And as we get into research plans in a couple seconds, I'll have some more concrete examples of that for you. So here is an example of some code stuff we did research on, trying to figure out what of this is easiest to recall. So if you had to do this command from memory, how likely is it that you would be able to do it? in clarity, do you know what this means? These are obviously real concerns because you don't want to have to pull up the docs every time you run a command, especially if it's a command we expect you're going to run a lot. And you can see here what we actually asked people was we showed them the command and then we just said rate this on its ease of recall, showed them these two scales. And then we had them rate it and we did this. This was actually, I think, something we ran at PuppetConf, so that's a good place to get a ton of volume. But you could just as easily post something like this on a forum you frequent or send it out to the contributor summit mailing list or whatever it happens to be. You know, even if you get 10 data points back, you'll hopefully have a trend. And then it's also good to remember if you don't have any sort of trends at all, then it may just mean from the perspective of your users, all of these things are about equal. And then you could just be like, oh, let's go for the shortest one, or let's go for the one that looks the most like other Puppet commands, or whatever it happens to be. So these would be questions you might ask directly to the person you're testing with to get a better sense of what their understanding is. So I think one of the biggest pitfalls of even really simple user research is that we have a tendency to assume somebody means what we think they mean. And one of your big challenges when you step into your UX researcher shoes is to say instead, what do you mean by that? And in various ways. So the goal there is basically like, they probably don't mean what you think they mean. And they'll think that you mean what they think you mean too. So it's like a really fun exercise in communication. You might ask for a minute, for instance, like, so say you want to understand if a command has high clarity. Do people look at this command and have a strong sense of what it'll do before they run? So you could just say, what does this command suggest to you? If you want to know if they're getting the output they expect, or even if you want to know if the command is doing what they think it's going to do, you could have them run the command and say, did this do what you expected it to do? If you want to make sure that the output you're giving back from a command is clear, you can ask, does this output have what you need? Or you could say, what would you do with the information in this output? One of the other big challenges, and I think it's important to kind of go easy on this with yourself out of the gate, is to not ask a leading question. And a leading question is a question where it's obvious what you want to hear back. So obvious leading questions are, do you like it? Do you like it is a very needy question, and we all feel it deep down inside, especially if we put a lot of ourselves into something. And the same way you think, oh, I know how I'd answer that, that's how anyone who you put in a room face-to-face or, virtually face-to-face, as it usually is, they're not going to be like, no, I hate this, you're terrible, because no one is like that, really. In that context, they'd be like, oh, yeah, I like it. Or if you ask them, would you use it? They're going to say, oh, yeah, I would use it. Because people are nice. And also there's just a general kind of fun trend. People like to please researchers. So the minute you take that authority on, you also get to take on that, oh yay, everyone wants to pat me on the back and tell me how great I am. So I think it's really, really important when you're doing research to try to hear what you don't want to hear as well as what you do want to hear. If you asked something like, oh, what did you like most about this command? You are then equally obligated to ask the opposite question, what did you like least about this command? And that can kind of be a useful sort of check against your own biases. Again, it's really hard and nearly impossible to never ask a leading question. I've been conducting research for years, and every once in a while it just kind of sneaks in there. This is kind of, I think, where it's hard to be what I'm calling kind of a guerrilla UX team of one, which is what most of you are, because like in my team, I have other people I can just be like, can you look at this script and tell me, like, is this leading? Is this biased? Whatever. And they'll usually give me like a pretty solid answer back. But in your case, you just kind of have to sort of get an instinct for like, oh, would I feel, if someone asked me that, how would I feel about being asked that? Because it's challenging not to put users too much on the spot when they're the only people who can tell you what you need to know. My other number one tip, use the fake expletive, is to write a research plan. And this gets back to where I started, and is going to be a theme of the next sort of 5 minutes, sure, the basically last 5 minutes of the presentation, maybe 5 minutes. You are new to research. You might not have very much time to conduct that research, and a research plan is overhead. It is. It's a document that you write to help you guide your research, but you need one. And all a research plan is a clear idea of what you want to learn and a little bit about why you want to learn it. And that gets back to my first theme, which is actionable data. which is data you can do something with. And the thing about a research plan is it doesn't have to be complicated. So a research plan in a nutshell is, what do you want to learn? What do you expect to find out? Who do you want to learn it from? And what do you want to do with that data? I think it's hard to do abstractly, so instead I have completely fabricated an app, which we will now use for the last couple examples. Boom. I thought about kind of trying to actually mock up this app, but I didn't, so we can all just imagine how adorable it is. So I put an app together, and I'm calling it Puppy Generator. And the purpose of Puppy Generator is to generate an ASCII puppy in terminal. And the puppy will be generated using the puppy generate command. So puppy generate, poof, a little puppy comes up. Pretty nice, pretty straightforward. Now, I've gotten feedback that people would like to specify the size and shape of their dog. And now I'm like, oh, okay, how do I want them to do that? So I have two potential command structures. One, it's all flags, so you generate a puppy, and then you can specify basically a width and a height. And the other one is you can generate a type of puppy, a small, medium, or large puppy, and then you can just specify a width. So now I want to say, okay, so now I'm going to make a research plan. My goal is to determine which of the two commands is faster for users to learn and easier for them to parse. I've defined what I think a better command is. So a better command to me is faster to learn and easier to parse. And so now I have a hypothesis. And my hypothesis is actually that users will prefer to specify all the puppy attributes in flags rather than specify size as like a type of puppy and then width or length as a second attribute. And that's really all our research plan has to have. It's really good to have something to test against because it sort of makes you aware of your biases. In a way, it's hard to get aware otherwise. So you start talking to a user and then they all just come out and bombard your user with them. And then B, it gives you something to test against, which means when you get your data, you can actually check, oh, let's see, I talked to 5 people. 3 of them said that this all flag attribute was easier to learn and everyone thought it was easier to parse. Okay, well, my hypothesis was right. Your hypothesis won't always be right, but sometimes it will, and that's a nice feeling. So let's talk about methods. So this is where you go gorilla, put on your gorilla suit, beat your chest. And this is where I just want to show you, this is how easy it is to conduct some real basic research. And with something as simple as the puppy generator, where it's just these basic commands that do something kind of out the gate, anyone can understand, oh, it makes a puppy. You could even do that with someone who didn't necessarily have the technical expertise. In your folks' case, and in most of the cases when we do research, and this is one of the reasons we maintain a participant database, you're not going to have that luxury. You'll probably need someone who's a more specific user profile, and it's worth it to spend a little time thinking about who do I expect to use this, and let's talk to them about whether they will use it or whether it makes sense to them. But for Puppy Generator, you could literally just be like, hey, person who sits next to me at work, I made a command that generates puppies. And then you could say, how would you show them the basic command and then ask, how would you generate a small puppy and see, oh, what do they come up with? You could have them look at the 2 commands and then pick the one and then just rate them like that thing we saw earlier. How memorable is this? How understandable is this? You could also just show them the 2 commands side by side and say, pick a command. What about that command appeals to you? You do that with about 5 people and you've got a pretty solid kind of initial run. But honestly, even 1 or 2 people will have some sort of insight. So it's also important, in addition to having your kind of agenda of research, to take a moment to sort of give them a chance to say. And a lot of people will kind of volunteer information in the sense that if you ask someone their opinion, you're going to get that opinion. And so if you have just a couple seconds, you could just hand someone the command and say, what do you think this does? And then you could give 3 people one command and 3 people the other command. And, if the 3 people who got one command are like, oh, I think this generates a small, fat puppy. And then the 2 people who got the other command are like, I don't know. Then you could say, okay, this is better. So see, these are really, really quick, really, really fast things that still at least can sort of give you some guidance. And I will say again, because repetition is the key to learning or something, it is not going to give you the whole picture because you're only talking to a couple people, but you can't talk to everyone. And that's just kind of a thing you acknowledge when you do really any kind of research, but especially kind of this sort of detailed, more usability focused stuff. So here's a total different example, a value research plan. So now my goal is to determine whether I should make the puppy generator application by seeing whether it has value to users. So will people use it? Do people want it? And in this case, I'm going to define value as providing a small but measurable moment of pleasure and entertainment. And so these are arbitrary. This is what I think would justify for me the time I'm going to spend building this puppy generator thing. And so now my hypothesis is just users will smile when they see a cute puppy and maybe they'll feel better. So how can I test that? Okay, so for instance, now I could, if I was kind of mean or had a little extra time, I could take someone into a room or virtual, bring someone into a remote meeting, call someone on the phone, and then annoy them. Do something annoying, play an annoying song, make them do a repetitive task for a couple seconds so they're kind of in a bad mood. And then I can be like, look, it's a puppy. Or did you look, type in this command, and they'll be like, generate puppy. And then they'll see a puppy. And if they're like, oh, haha, what a cute puppy, then look, I lifted their mood. So that's kind of a sort of easy, simple way to test. I could give people here's a thing that generates puppies. Can you give me a few scenarios where you'd use it? And I could see what are the scenarios they come up with? Does it feel forced? So especially if you're asking people to sort of do the positive case, it's worth sort of noticing, do they hesitate a lot? Can they only come up with one reason? And those nuances are things you'll get more and more sensitive to if you pursue research kind of ongoingly. You'll just kind of get a sense of, oh, you're kind of telling, there's sort of a moment you're like, oh, you're telling me what I want to hear. Okay. And that can happen. But yeah, so those are sort of two examples. As you saw in this slide, how easy is it? It's pretty easy. You can literally just find a person you know online. Hey, come join me in this Google Hangout. Come hang out with me on Skype. There's a tool called Zoom Meeting, which I think in its basic thing is free. You can also just do the obvious thing in Google usability testing tools. I've included a link to a pretty intense overview of many testing tools that you may find interesting. A lot of them are probably, again, going to be more than you need. In your case, the easiest thing might be let's just print this out, shop it around my workplace, unless you work from home, and then you could shop it around remotely, just send a PDF or whatever happens to be, and just ask some basic questions. The three things I would like you to take away from this is not the Spanish Inquisition. One, you are in UX because you are building a thing people use. Period. End of sentence. Even if it ends up being a thing that goes behind some shiny graphical interface, you have determined how the interactions work at the end, and that has a lot of repercussions. All decisions in a UX world are dominoes. So as a person coding, you are a key domino, and that's a very powerful and mighty responsibility. Two, it's really not hard to just start asking questions. And all research is, at the end of the day, is asking questions, ideally of the people who are using the thing that you built, or who you want to have use the thing that you built, or who could feasibly use the thing that you built. As you're more constrained by time and resources, you get less picky. If you have a day and you want some feedback, you're just going to grab the nearest person. If you have a week, you might try a little okay, let's try to find someone I think is really the right person to use this. The third thing is just be really, really aware that you bring all your biases into this activity, and do your best to write a research plan, be explicit about what you think you're going to learn, because that is what helps you, I think, the most, get value out of your research. So even if it's 5 minutes, there's always something better you could be doing with those 5 minutes if you get nothing out of them, both for you and whoever has been kind enough to give you some of their time. And then two is that idea of bias with that, of being real aware when you're guiding someone to saying what you want to hear, and trying to create space in those conversations to hear what you don't want to hear. So the fun final exercise for context, because context is big, and to sort of get at the idea of assumptions, I want you all to think for a minute about how you would describe a cell phone to someone in the 1800s. And when you start thinking about all of the words you can't use, and all of the concepts they don't know, I think that can provide a really valuable, basically, into what it means to drop all of your assumptions, which again, I don't think is an option. You can't, be realistic, be kind to yourself, especially at the gate, when you're new. But try to think you know that much, especially if you're building this thing. Like whatever you are building, you're invested in it. You know what it's supposed to do. You know how it's supposed to do it. Whoever you're talking to could very well, in comparison, be an 18th century, like, brand new to the Industrial Revolution, barely understands steam and like steam technology. And what does it mean to create a shared understanding with that person? So that was my somewhat rambly overview. I will now basically just open the floor for questions, comments, thoughts, clarifications, anything of the sort.
All right, I'll start. Thank you. Um, in conducting user research, there's also, I think there is probably a balance between asking people what they think about something. If you're also the designer, then you're also kind of defending your own ideas, I guess. So it should, in theory, probably be better to conduct research independently of developing stuff.
The short answer is yes. Ideally, the person who builds the thing and the person who asks people what they think of the thing should be totally separate people, exactly because you are more invested if you build the thing. That said, especially in the case of you folks, it's not realistic. And that's just where it gets really, one thing you can do is not tell the person you're talking to that you built it. So you can kind of try to sort of undermine that desire not to tell people something they built sucks. The other thing you can do is sort of downplay it. So you can be like, I'm putting this thing together. This is a really rough prototype of how it might work. I don't think this is right. I'd love to get your opinion. So you kind of, like, your goal is to make it safe and socially acceptable for them to express sentiments that they might not be comfortable expressing if you were like, I built this thing and it's great. I can't wait to show it to you. And I think that enthusiasm is really natural, but has no place, unfortunately, in a research-specific content. And I will say, if you do want to do research, if you think you want to, and you want just, I'd be happy to look over a research plan and try to provide some useful feedback or thoughts on it. That is a huge part of my job, and I think it's really worthwhile to get to do it with community members, so I'm happy to help out like that. And likewise, if you have questions that you either don't want to bring up in a group setting or don't have yet, but get like 20 minutes from now, please do email me. I am also, I think I'm on Puppet Slack, but I'm not very good at Slack, so you're probably better off emailing me.
And I'm happy to connect anyone with you, Mari. If anybody here, they've been seeing my emails, and I'm also on Slack too, so feel free to always reach out to me, and I'll be happy to connect you with Mari.
Otherwise, I'll give it like one more minute for awkward thinking silence, and then I will assume that we have concluded the immediate questions. Maybe 30 seconds for awkward silence.
Supposedly it takes 16 seconds for people to think and then ask a question.
Ooh, that actually reminds me. Another really important thing, this is funny, especially in context, when you're conducting research, you will need to be really conscious of giving people time to think. If you ask someone a question, try not to ask them, try not to stack questions, because that makes it just a harder cognitive load, and also then the answers you get back are going to be more jumbled. And two, if they're quiet, give them like a full internal count of at least 10 before you try to clarify or ask another question, because the chances that they're you kind of have the easy, in ways you have the hardest job, because you're trying to subtract your biases and learn. But in a way, they have the hardest job because they're kind of on the spot in a way, and they have to sort of come up with the content, which is hard. So that's definitely something to be really aware of. And hilariously, because clearly it's not my forte, be really comfortable with long silences. The one thing you can say if it starts to feel really long, and again, at least a count of 10 before you assume that, is like, you can ask someone to kind of, if you don't mind, I'd love it if you could think about this out loud. So people spend a lot of time kind of trying to package an answer nicely and put a little bow on it so they can hand you this cute little present. And a lot of those thoughts that go into that process, whether it's how they're cutting their mental wrapping paper or taping it, can be super valuable insights. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I will go ahead and wrap it up. Please do let me know if questions come up. I spend all day, every day in this, and it's more than possible that I oversimplified, undersimplified, or just totally glossed over something that you're going to get really stuck with. And I'm more than happy to help get you unstuck, to help make sure that whatever research you're planning to do is as robust as it can be in the circumstances, and anything of that nature. I guess I will hand it back to you, Anna, for an outro, or
Yeah.
do we just call it?
Yeah, well, if there's any last questions, anything people want to say before we sign off, now's your chance.
Thanks for your time. This really refreshing perspective on stuff that I normally don't think about. So it's always nice to learn about this kind of stuff.
Excellent. If I have made you all think, then I feel I have completely done my job. At the end of the day, you are all in UX, and it's a glorious place to be. So enjoy your newfound awareness of your dual roles. But don't expect raises. I don't control that.
Thanks, Mari, and thank you all for joining us.